Will there still be the old swamp biome in 1.19, or will the new one replace them? So this is the new mangrove biome. It's coming in the wild update, and the good news for you, Jake Plays Gaming, is that you will still be able to access the old swamp biome. This has been implied a lot of times, especially at Minecon Live, that it's not going to be a replacement biome, but rather a new variant of the biome, and the easiest way to prove that is by looking around this mangrove and thinking about the one structure the swamp has and trying to imagine it spawning anywhere here. Speaking of here, by the way, we actually got an update as to when we'll be seeing the mangrove biome in the game itself as far as snapshots and betas go, and what Jappa says is that it's still a work in progress and it needs to stay in the oven for a little while longer, so will not be in any upcoming snapshots or betas. And that's really interesting to say, because when you look at this, it looks like the majority of the progress is just adding a new type of tree, adding the new generation, and then, making sure the biome fits together. However, clearly somewhere in that process, one of those things is broken, and so the majority of the 1.19 snapshots, at least for a little while longer, whether that means weeks or months, is going to be focused on the other parts and angles of this update. Also, just in case you're curious, looking at that, you see that, like, okay, here's some things I'd like to see fixed. 3 things they've already confirmed they will be fixing after this is they're going to be adding more inland water, adding dead bushes to fit it up a little bit and push the stick theme more, and then potentially patches of grass to make the floor more diverse, which I think those are all pretty interesting ideas worth going through. And yeah, it seems as though the mangrove is going to be an interesting enough biome. I do have to say though, it does seem significantly less interesting than the other big thing in this update, so let's get to the deep dark of it, shall we? And AllSeeing5 asks, how do you find the deep dark? This is one of the most interesting things about the snapshot from last week that I feel like we're not properly addressing. The deep dark and the ancient cities are incredibly rare. They are so rare that you can go thousands of blocks in survival and not possibly find one, and given that those thousands of blocks have to be underground, that is a seriously long time. So I think they have to do one of 2 things between now and release. Either they have to make the deep dark ancient cities more common, that's the easier thing to do, or they have to make it so there's some telegraph signal that there is going to be one of those down there. In the same way you can tell there is a lush cave when you find the azalea tree, there'd be something like that that could maybe indicate you're near the deep dark. I think a really fun way to do it, to make it actually interactive and more interesting than just a tree on the surface, would be if redstone ore rates were slightly higher around the deep dark. You could also argue slightly lower, but I think given that there is the redstone link there, I think doing something to make the deep dark spottable or making the deep dark more common is probably a good idea, because right now it's just so rare that it's genuinely a problem, in my opinion. Speaking of my opinion, let's move into the next question, which comes in from What Do You Know About Rolling Down in the Deep When Your Brain Go, who says, do you think that 1.20 should be a huge parity patch or something else we have been looking forward to? And I definitely think there's not going to be a parity focused major update version anytime too soon, and the reason I think that is because in general the Java community looks at Bedrock and they see like a feature or 2 maybe that they really want, whereas it's the Bedrock community who looks at Java and goes, wait, why do we still not have the feature of like placing torches in your offhand? That seems like a really good idea. I think the answer, by the way, as to why the offhand is being delayed so much is because how is that ever going to work on touchscreen devices like a second hand? Anyway, so that's obviously a very big issue, and there's so many big parity things that people want from Bedrock's Java, but as an example as to how parity is getting worse, I wanted to prove a really fun example. Here is a brand new block they're adding for the first time in 1.19. This is now several years after committing to making sure that Bedrock and Java are as close to being the same as they humanly can, and as you can see, 2 brand new blocks on Bedrock, they can be pushed with pistons. It's actually really interesting the things you'll be able to do with that, whereas on Java, you cannot move them with pistons whatsoever. This is because they're tile entities, which is something Bedrock added a long time ago, like 6 years ago now, that you can move tile entities with pistons. However, Java never got around to adding it, and this is just that continual point that, like, we can say the word parity as much as we like, and I'm sure we make tiny little movements every update, but also every update it gets a tiny bit further apart in some ways too, and that's something that is very hard to avoid. Speaking of things that are hard to avoid, 2 things. Why would anyone visit the Deep Dark for skulks and enchant alone? And number 2, I have the Xbox 360 version, disc form is that rare. First things first, I want to say that unequivocally, I would still go to the Deep Dark, even if it was just for the sculk blocks and the enchantments alone. I don't think it would be hugely exciting. 1.19 would come out and it would just be skulks and the enchantment, and I'd be like, well, let's go down there. Oh, there's a warden, this is scary, better snack up and get away. And then I'd take my sculk blocks and I'd take my enchantment, and then I'd move on my day. I say that as if I'd find the Deep Dark quickly. Again, there's a big problem that it would take me a very long time just to get get those skulks in that enchantment. However, I do think that they need to add something, not because it's necessarily inadequate right now, but just because it's like barely adequate. Just because it's like, well, this is a very rare thing that is very cool and very hyped up and has the big protective mob, and it just doesn't really have anything necessarily defending right now. That's one of the reasons why the portal is the big mystery we're all waiting for. Sadly wasn't answered in this week's beta, by the way. I figured, ooh, there's a bedrock beta coming out. Maybe they're gonna throw the warden in there. We can see if it's different on bedrock. Sadly, we have not seen that yet. But anyway, the second question that Pyroshock asks is the Xbox 360 version of Minecraft rare? And the answer is technically no. There's like 1 million copies out there. However, they haven't printed Xbox 360 games in quite some time, as best I can tell. And so if you have Minecraft on the Xbox 360, I think given the sentimental value that it has and given the technically limited supply, it's going to be only going up in value from here on out. Whether that will be a lot of value or not is something only time can tell. But if you have Minecraft Xbox 360, make sure to savor it and not let it go. If only we'd realized that in the days of 2012, we might have been more careful. Speaking of being more careful, Matari says, what if the Deep Dark portals linked to completely random other Deep Dark portals in a world? For example, you lock out and end up greater than 1 million and 1 million, like a travel gate built into Minecraft. So this was one of my theories I raised in my first video last week. Again, that was kind of my first impressions of what could be going on right here. However, I do think, having thought about it a lot more since then and having read a lot of comments, truthfully, going to the Deep Dark and then just maybe traveling a few thousand blocks, it'd be amazing if it was 1 million, but if it was just a few thousand average, you wouldn't want to use it very often because you have to go all the way down to, minus 30 or whatever. Then you're going to end up at minus 30 where you are. You're going to have to spiral out there, and then because Deep Dark cities are randomly placed, they're not placed by you, it's going to be very hard to work it into something. You'd have to build your base around that travel portal, and given that we already have other ways to get around, we have Elytras, we have the Nether, it would have to be serious distances before it's worthwhile. And how many people are building their bases across tens of thousands or millions of blocks like you say? And if they are they really getting more benefit than just building these separate bases closer by to each other? What I'm saying right here is I think the travel idea was a fun one, but probably isn't going to stick. But, there's lots of things that have been dumber that I'm sure were added to Minecraft. Speaking of dumber, Leo J TNT Minecraft says, why do you call it Puma? And you know what? I think that, Americans, having your own set of accents is fine. They're delightful. They're really enjoyable in some cases. And I think that having, an international way of speaking is fine. And the fact that that's mostly American is something I don't let bother me too much. However, the thing that annoys me most is brands, especially European brands. In the case of Puma, they're a German company, I want to say. But picking your own pronunciation off that brand, which I had to Google, and apparently it's Puma, which sounds a lot like Puma, by the way, I do just have to say. But then the crazy thing here is then going on record and being like, wow, you sure are weird for saying it different. It's the same with Adidas and being like, oh no, it's Adidas. You made up your own syllable to stress. You can't act like that's normal. The other one is, Marriott, as opposed to Marriott. I mean, do you call the bird that's on your shoulder that pirates love that repeats what you say, do you call that a parrot? Oh yeah, it's the parrot. He loves to eat the carrots, those orange things that grow in the ground. No, that's ludicrous. But when it comes to brands, Americans just make up their own pronunciation and then have the nerve to go on the internet and insist that it's weird to pronounce it the way that it's meant to be pronounced. You know what? While we're at it, I just want to say this bothers me a lot too. People who think that my username is Tomcat is disproportionately high over there too, and I cannot work it out. It's like the Y. It's not like it looks like an M. I did lots of research. I checked on a keyboard. The Y and the M are very far away from each other. How do you get Toycat as Tomcat? Are the M and the Y that similar in your vocabulary? Do people assume that I'm making the typo? You know what? Speaking of things that annoy me, Drift_YT, how do you get the warden? I'm on the latest snapshot and there is no warden. So we keep talking about the latest snapshot, the one from last week. I mean, there was one this week for 1.18.2, but the one from last week that showed off the warden. However, if you go to the latest snapshot, you will not find a warden in there. Why is that? It's because they did an experimental snapshot, which means that you can't just download it from the launcher. You have to download it by going to the Minecraft.net website, extracting a zip file, moving that zip file into your versions folder. And so you might be questioning, why is that? What is the point of having a snapshot process where we see every week what they're working on if they do some things as experimental? And I totally agree. From a user standpoint, like, it takes a few extra steps, and it's perfectly fine for me. I mean, you've seen that I've made a video, and it's fine with that. But I think that for a lot of people, extra barriers, no matter how simple they are to overcome, are an annoyance, or they're just something they physically can't get over. They're going to be confused about. So why did they go through all of the effort of making it an experimental snapshot that you couldn't download from the launcher? And sadly, it's this thing that I feel like we have to mention over and over again, because it's one of the big problems I would say we have as a community. People who will play a snapshot and then think this is a locked in stone version of how Minecraft needs to be, and then get mad when it changes. You know, imagine playing around with a snapshot and being like, well, the warden has 500 health, that's how things will always be, and then if it lowers to 450, being like, the warden is ruined, I think that we need to fire King Bee Dogs right now until we get back to it. And you might think that that's going extreme, but when you listen to how you know, certain redstone or combat mechanics change, and how much people scream at developers, or even things like Deep Slate and the previous name, which was Grimstone, and people went crazy, and it's just like, guys, this is a snapshot. Anything can change. They could decide to remove Grimstone from the game entirely. You don't get to, you know, act like this was a stuck-in-stone version. I feel like people almost sometimes forget that this is like our peak in there, and we can give feedback, but it's important not to make that feedback violent or aggressive or anything like that, because ultimately we all should have the same goal of making Minecraft better, and it's sad that some people don't seem to have that goal. And speaking of goals, Pete Diaz D just says, it just dawned on me, why on earth doesn't the player being on fire, standing inside the nether portal, ignite the portal? And you know what? I totally agree this should be a thing. I think that not only is it a logical change for Minecraft, you know, it's kind of a fun one when you stand on portal on fire, it should light up. I think that Minecraft has so many ways a portal can break, it should have more ways a portal should light. But also, second of all, imagine how good it would be for speedrunning if you could light yourself on fire to go through the portal. It would add a new dimension of skill and fun to the game, and I'm just saying, if somehow you're watching this video and you're a Minecraft developer, then get back to work. We need to work out how to put the offhand on mobile devices somehow. But then second of all, before you do that, actually, wait, I think they're gone. Anyway, but maybe, just maybe, it would be cool if you could light yourself on fire and then go into a nether portal. It has the same mechanics, it's just a little bit more fun for pro players. Speaking of pro players, David Bassett says, am I right in thinking that bedrock strongholds will be harder to find? Because if these seeds were generated on Java and then added to bedrock, strongholds aren't necessarily going to spawn underneath villagers unless structures are not generated the same, even on the same seeds. So this is talking about 1.18.20, an update I'm very excited for, by the way. I really am excited for the small updates Minecraft's been going through recently. They've been making them, like, actually interesting and exciting. But in that update and in the betas that I showed off for Seed Tuesday this last week, they actually added all of the seeds which were previously just on Java to Bedrock. It's actually just making these seed fields 64 bits, but it means that all of the seeds which previously were Java only are now on Bedrock. And you might be thinking, but Java seeds have the strongholds that are harder to find because they're not under villagers. However, things like stronghold generation, even the decorations like where trees spawn, are still different between platforms. The way the biomes underlying everything spawning are exactly the same between Bedrock and Java. That's a cool bit of parity. However, even though seeds are the same, where structures spawn, and that includes the strongholds, are going to be entirely different. And that's why if you take the exact same seed that I showed off on Tuesday and you plug it into Java, it will look exactly the same. It just won't have a stronghold below that village, and it also won't have the village because the village is also a structure. Speaking of structures, the structure of this video implies that we go through 10 questions, and so the 10th question of the video here comes in from IBX Toycat asking, why haven't you subscribed? Did you know that it's the greatest way to see these videos daily on your homepage? And did you know, thanks to the kind sponsorship of the notification bell, you can actually get yourself a free subscription to this channel for the first 30 days. Do that by subscribing over at youtube.com/IBXToycat, youtube.com/IBXToycat now. We thank the notification bell for supporting the channel, let's be honest, very poorly with the way that works. And I guess I'll see you all in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. I'm looking forward to seeing maybe the Warden on Bedrock in the next week. I'll let you know as soon as we see it, because for now, I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, as this goes up, I'm on a mountain in Wales. It should be pretty, but it also might kill me. So we'll see if I upload another video. If not, just assume that, you know, I'm dead. You know what? Actually, that'd be a waste of the subscription. So, you know, if you subscribe right now, I'll make sure I don't die just for you. Bye.